A good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. Charles Mongu Shampagi. And tonight we'll be following the campaign trail of the candidates but asking the question, do opinion polls count in this election cycle? Now, a brief update, I'll bring you where all the other candidates were today, but starting with the candidate for the National Resistance Movement, Yoweri Museveni, was in Masindi. From my understanding, he summoned flag bearers from the region to meet him in Masindi as he tries to broker peace with NRM leading independents, leaning independents who have decided to contest, especially after negotiating with him or with the party, to still run when they are flag bearers. So he summoned some of the flag bearers to have a discussion with him. They've been asking him, can you tell these other independents to leave us alone? Kiza Besigye was also in the Bunyoro sub-region, campaigning in Kibale district, and Amama Mbabazi campaigned in Uganda. His team was involved in an accident, from what we understand. I know it's not a very good evening for Arsenal supporters, especially after losing to Chelsea, which is supposed to be very far from chasing the title. Let me introduce my colleagues in the studio tonight to discuss.
That's the equivalent of being tripped by a stone. And you're walking.
Let me start with Honor Peter Komoloit, Corporate Affairs Director, Nile Breweries, SAB Miller. Honor, very nice to have you.
Yeah, good evening. I'm part of the Arsenal downcast supporters. But even worse still, the Cranes being beaten yesterday.
Yes, even the Cranes was beaten in Rwanda on the
really killed the weekend.
And Manu was beaten yesterday. So it's not a very nice
The
weekend.
Manu one was expected.
And the Arsenal one?
No.
Title chasers. Peter Kalo Jabweli worked with the Electoral Commission at some time, worked with the New Vision, and he's a lawyer and a journalist. Now you're doing consultancy. Very nice to have you.
Thank you, Charles, and good evening, viewers.
You're one of the hurting Arsenal supporters.
True.
From what I understand.
But we always come back very quickly.
You haven't seen a trophy in 11 seasons, so...
No, we've been winning the FA Cup for the last 2 years consecutively.
What the consolation.
You don't have your facts.
Yeah, that's the consolation cup.
Yeah.
And of course, Angelo, very nice to have you back after a long while.
Thank you.
Yeah. Angelo Izama. Angelo Izama is many things. He's a journalist, he's a consultant in many areas, and I don't know what else to say. You were a fellow the last time we had you here. You're in a fellowship.
Yeah, my current fellowship just ended this last month.
This last month. Okay, very nice to have you. Let me start with you and ask the very broad question. In the last week, we had a lot of debate about opinion polls. One opinion poll was by the New Vision, the largest sample size of any opinion poll that has been conducted in this country, over 6,000 people sampled. And the second opinion poll was by Research World International, 2,658, I think, people, and they have a huge variance in their findings. New Vision puts candidate Yoweri Museveni at 71%. I think the major question about that was they had conducted a similar opinion poll in July, published on July 20th, which gave candidate Yoweri Museveni 71%. And they had done another opinion poll in 2011 that gave candidate Museveni 71%. And the people asking, what is the magic about this 71%?
Is it correlation or causation?
And Research World International's poll, the last one they released last year, gave Museveni 54%. This one gives him 51%. But Ofono Pondo, who's executive director at the Uganda Media Center, threw some salt into the wound yesterday about that opinion poll, and said he had been part of a discussion on some payment for the poll. And there is, but do opinion polls matter in the overall scheme of things?
Of course, I believe in the science of polls. If you look at the institutions for which polls do matter the most, they're not necessarily political parties. And for political parties, especially during campaigns here and in other developed political markets, constantly keeping an eye on what the public thinks about your candidate, about your policies, has become a matter of course. And the science of polls, I find, is not a problem. But of course, we do know that there are aspects of polling that do not clearly guarantee that what the public says is in fact what they will do. You remember the UK election of, I think it was last year? All the polls predicted that it would be a close election. In fact, I stayed up that night and the exit polls were the ones that showed that Labour would be beaten badly. I couldn't believe it, actually, the first time I had the initial exit polls, and I was like, no, let me wait and see. By the time the actual results were released, it was far from what the polls had said earlier.
Yes.
But the nature of polls is that they measure perception at a particular time. And in politics, where anything can change, public opinion keeps shifting. Now, I have looked only partly at the two polls that have caused this current controversy. And I think that, and I was having a discussion with someone about this, that if you look at the actual science of polls, which is a very technical discussion, I think that both polls have problems. For example, I don't agree with a large sample size. It's not, and it's unnecessary.
I think 6,500.
Yeah, if you look at most polls, including standard Gallup polls and other run by professional polling companies, sample size is actually 1,300, 1,600 at most. It's a small size. It's the medical equivalent of if I wanted to know that Onai is suffering from malaria, I only take a little part of his blood. I don't need to take a liter,
to draw a liter, yes.
To figure out that. Polling operates in the same way if it's done right. So I disagree with the large sample size in both those polls. That's not to discount everything else that was found in those polls. Dr. Wakita's poll, I looked at part of it with my partner this evening. There are some incredible findings there that suggest that questions were asked were not properly framed. For example, if you go on the PowerPoint and look at I think it's 17 all throughout, people who were asked, for example, would say things like, they were asked, do you know all the candidates? And there was a very high margin of people who actually knew their candidates. Very unlikely that people could name, for example, the lady from Busoga, that she has that much name recognition. Also, there were above 80% of almost all people sampled said that they had national IDs and had actually picked their national IDs, and that they had checked their names on the register. That is a very highly unlikely scenario.
I also saw 96%, actually 97% who said that they are ready to go and vote.
Yeah, but for example, now you take these very high people who are prepared to vote, and then they were asked, when is the election? And most people don't know.
45%.
If you're going to be that prepared for an election, at least you should know when it is. So I think that the way the questions were framed...
Of, the communication from the Electoral Commission on some of these factual issues about the election.
Yeah, but if you're going to have such a high degree of preparedness about your own votability, to use the word that your NGO uses, you should at least know. The fact that those two aspects are not congruent is the way the questions were asked. I suspect that there are issues there to be revisited.
Let me ask, you compare opinion polls in the Western world and opinion polls here, and you think really those opinion polls matter? Do they reflect what will come out? And of course, I need to put a disclaimer here that previous opinion polls have tended to agree with or be close to the outcome, especially 2011.
Yes, exactly. That's why I wanted to start from that. Whereas we'd put a caveat and perhaps treat the opinion polls with a bit of doubt. The previous opinion polls, if you go by 2011, as you've said, especially for candidate, the NRM candidate, the winning candidate, came close to what the opinion polls were saying. I know that, for example, the very first week, after the candidates they went through the first week of campaigns, a poll showed up, propagated mostly by a friend of mine called Joel Isabidi, who tends to say there will be an 87.3 percentage win. Have you heard of that poll?
No, I haven't.
Yes.
I had the debate around
yes, there's a poll
and an opinion poll around that time. But
he's again come up strongly on social media to maintain that we've seen a poll that says the NRM candidate will win by 87.3,
But Joel Isabel is working for the NRM, isn't he?
Yes.
Yes.
And,
so if he's working for the NRM...
Okay. So, polls, yes, in the Western world, the fair, as Angela said, there are standards. Like many things, I think the polls represent the level of development. Our standards are not clear. If you ask for sample size, the methods used, you won't find, for example, the New Vision poll, a lot of questions were not being answered. In fact, people raised a lot of questions no one was willing to come up and answer. And coming up at a time when New Vision, for example, had been literally campaigning for one candidate from page 1 to page 6 almost, or page 5 on a daily basis. They have been telling the whole country there's one candidate almost campaigning against themselves, then they turn up with a poll. So a lot of people are likely to have the misgivings. But having said that, this election is turning out to be the most scrutinized. If you've observed, almost on a weekly, daily basis now there's a report, either on campaign funding, on polling, on the crowds, and on the media coverage. So
media coverage, security,
yes.
But this is also the last couple of weeks. So
yes,
a lot of,
but it's turning out to be like the most scrutinized. So the polls are falling into as part of that. Are they influencing? Are they
do you see
likely
this as a positive or a negative thing?
I think it's a positive thing, especially for those who are into research. Years afterwards, would like to come up and check what were the factors at play. The poll by the second one, which gave NRM 51.
The one by Research
had
World.
the other things that people tend not to focus on, like, but some pointers. For example, the fact that many people believe if Yoweri Museveni is defeated, he will not hand over power. The fact that...
well, do you need to find that out from anybody?
So
He's been saying it himself.
Well, he can say so, but if the people are going to vote, actually buy into that, and that informs their decision-making on whether to vote or how to vote come that day, then it's a significant thing.
Okay.
So, yes.
If you could just conclude your point, because I need to draw in on Apito.
Yes, so the polls tell us something. But again, we have to take all this in context. One, our societies, do they believe in polling the people? The numbers of people who are non-committal, who are saying for me, I've not decided, were quite a substantial number.
I thought actually that's the missing, that's the most significant thing for me,
yes.
That you have a smaller number of people, a smaller percentage of people who haven't decided.
Yes.
If you look at the poll by Research World, 51% say they will vote for President Yoweri Museveni, for candidate Yoweri Museveni, 32% for Kizza Besigye, 12% for Amama Mbabazi, and then the percentage that remains of undecideds is rather small. The New Vision poll, 71% for candidate Yoweri Museveni, 19% for candidate Kizza Besigye. You've almost finished it out, and 6% for candidate Amama Mbabazi. And you have a very small percentage that is actually undecided.
That goes to tell you something about the polls, as Angelo said, either something that makes these polls be a little bit, you have to take them with a pinch of salt, because the average Ugandan, especially in the countryside, is not the type who will come out openly, especially to a stranger. Who are you going to vote for? They don't know you. You could be on a mission. So for people to come up definitely and say, I'm going to vote this one and not the other one, is a bit of a question mark for me.
You rely a lot on market research. So opinion polling in politics is the equivalent of market research to determine whether you're going to put more Nile gold into the market or you're going to put another product. So you're going to phase out chairman.
Maybe that's an unfair comparison, because some people say beer is more popular than politicians.
No, but
look, but anyway, more seriously, I'm actually one of the biggest fans of opinion polls, because I believe that they actually empower the citizens or the voters. In fact, I'm really following the American election, the Republican race, and how much the polls seem to be actually determining the race. You know,
you must
those who have spoken, the pollsters, have scared everyone to say that this guy whom they want,
but you saw the other day
is really the man. So
Mrs. Clinton her spokesperson dismissed the poll in Iowa, which had said that her ratings were falling.
And Bernie Sanders was rising up.
So you find that polls really, I know it's not in our culture, but they almost also speak to what I know is common during election time, when people, you may call it gossip, or talk about whom do people think is going to win. Basically, polls help the majority who tend to be aloof. Most people are not very engaged during elections. And if you had constant polling, then more people will be drawn into following the potential outcome of the elections. Because the polls are equivalent of those guys in most areas around trading centers who always talk about candidates, so and so is more popular, and they kind of shape opinion. The guys got listen to them, and the guys say, we have heard from the other place that the guy is dominant, there is what have you. So opinion polls would have a very good value, and I hope they will continue to gain currency. Coming to the two polls, for me, I'm not really so bothered by the numbers or the diversity or the difference in I'm more keen on the trends that both polls seem to reflect.
Can we discuss the trends after a short commercial break? Let's pick up right from there. After a short commercial break, we'll be right back. Do opinion polls count as we turn the final bend of the February 18th election? Camps are in panic mode. I've seen, Honor, you're raising something about the trend.
Yeah, from the
trends being set by the polls?
Yeah, no, both polls tend to, I mean, they reflected some movements. Or let's say, look at the three key candidates. That's Yoweri Museveni, Kizza Besigye, and Amama Mbabazi. I think both Vision Poll and Research World International, they showed that Yoweri Museveni is still in the lead. And that perception is not only reflected in those polls. I've read virtually every commentary about the Uganda election, internal and foreign, has ended up with the conclusion that Yoweri Museveni is expected to win this election. Whether those conclusions are erroneous, but consistently. So the polls are not very far from the general trend of analysis. Two,
and are they trying to reinforce?
Both polls reflected a surge by Kizza Besigye. And there you just have to watch. It's palpable across the country. His rallies are full of energy. So you can see that he's surging. Whether his surge is going to be adequate to pull him closer to victory, and that means knocking down the lead of Yoweri Museveni is something we have to wait to see.
That's what the Research World International polls seems to suggest. And
even Vision was showing that he has surged.
He grew by 10%.
Yeah, it's a surge of some sort. And then Amama Mbabazi also, there is a sort of stagnation, which again is observable in many respects.
In the New Vision poll, he grew by 2 percentage points. In the Research World poll, he dropped by a percentage, 1 percentage.
And then the other trend is the regional dominance of the candidates, which to me is very critical. I always watch to see whether some of the bloc votes, the ethno-regional dynamics would change in this election. And I can see they are not changing so much, which the polls also reflect that Yoweri Museveni is still leading in terms of regional perception of support. I mean, for example, if you look at his sweep of the western region, whether the crowds are rented or otherwise, at least the other candidates were not seemingly having such huge support, you know. The people seem to be lukewarm.
There's something I noticed and heard from people.
Yeah.
I was in Fort Portal until this afternoon, and Kizza Besigye got quite a huge crowd.
Yeah, and that's the surge I've been talking about.
Yes, and he also got quite a huge crowd in Kienjojo district, neighboring Kienjojo district, and it panicked the NRM. So they've deployed everything they possibly can, and President Museveni has been camped there for almost 4 days because he coordinated his campaigns for Bundibujo, Ntoroko, Kamwenge from Fort Portal. And he's still been there. He went to Masindi. He's going back because Fort Portal will be hosting the 30 years of NRM, the Liberation Day on Tuesday. So there's a lot of intense activity. There's a lot of teams that are working, both political and non-political teams, working in those areas. When we open up the phone lines, which will be in a short while, we'll be asking our viewers to share with us, do these opinion polls reflect what you find in your different areas? Can you tell us whether the analysis going on in the studio and the opinion polls actually reflective of the mood where you live or work when you call us. Let's broaden this discussion a little bit more, and starting with you, Jabweli. We don't tend to discuss the other candidates, but candidate Benon Beraro is not only a senior military figure who remained largely quiet during his service in the military, but managed to grow significantly. And he's run a message that is that connects with people under his Farmers Party. People, even without the debate that happened on the 15th, people think that he spoke certain things that were out of the normal way of doing things. Candidate Abed Bwanika, of course, he's disadvantaged by one major thing, that this is his fourth go at the presidency. He's maintained a similar message, he's been extremely articulate, but he never seems to go beyond the 50,000 votes or so. The other group is...
And they had a problem with Kasuja, the debate, the moderator over that.
Yes.
They had an altercation. Why? Why continuing to
run when you know you can't go beyond a certain number?
Yes.
And you have Venantius Variamreva, new from the university, young, launched a book just before he announced he was running for the presidency. You have Maureen Chalia, the only woman candidate. You have Mabirizi, and you have, I think those are the candidates. Why do you think by not discussing them as intensely as we discuss the three front runners, we are missing something, especially when it comes to regional blocks that Ona was talking about, and whether they can take away anything?
I think, Charles, the first thing to take note of is that as we've seen from 1996, all the elections we've had in the last few years tend to be a referendum of sorts on the person of President Yoweri, the incumbent president. So from 96 to 2001 to 2006, 2011, normally it is about President Museveni and one individual, the other candidate, who most voters who don't like the incumbent think has the most likely chance of dislodging him. So it tends to be a two-horse race. I'm yet to see whether this will change, especially with the coming into place of the Mama Fact, the go-forward team, whether it will change, but I can almost certainly see a similar situation coming. So that's why in the nick of things, eventually some of the candidates, stroke candidates, these ones, the other candidates, as you may say, tend not to get a fair hearing, especially, for example, if you talk of opinion polls. But for sure, if you want to go by the message, I think Major General Benon Biraro, as he said in the debate and also in the campaigns generally, has sort of had a very good message that resonates with many people. In the debate, if you remember, one of the things he said, just at the beginning, in the opening remarks, he said this election could make or unmake the country. And he was comparing the two extreme ends. It tends to position himself as a middle of the ground, safe hand to steer the country. He said that from the language, the messages I get from the opposing ends, this election could make or unmake the country. Now, if you reflect the defiance message and you reflect the message of the status quo, the incumbent and the people who speak for him, you find a message that the election could be won by one camp and then the other camp will refuse. So it's true, some of the other candidates are having a good message, but the election eventually will turn out to be Museveni versus one of the
other two. The opinion polls seem to point us to where this is likely to go. But the question is, are they likely to take out anything if they are not paid attention to? Can they be spoilers? Is there a spoiler among the other 5 candidates, for example?
I don't really see, again, the politics of Uganda, unlike Kenya, where the candidates represent, for example, tribal blocks, okay, or some ideological bloc, maybe in the developed world. In Uganda, I don't see what bloc, for example, candidate, any of the other candidates stands for, even the leading ones.
Candidate Shari has been positioning herself about Busoga, Eastern region.
Yes,
Yes, she's been very clear about that.
Busoga, Eastern region.
And she's a woman.
Yes.
So she's trying to appeal to the women.
Before Angelo comes in, maybe this is an exciting point. I think other candidates are victims of the Ugandan mindset of a strong man. I mean, Ugandans almost don't give you a chance. To use the American expression, your candidate is dead on arrival, you know? They may say you're a good person, you're making good points, but they always tend to think, how do you measure in the real ball game? I mean, are you strong enough to take on Yoweri Museveni? So they tend to narrow it to really your ability, connection to the military. This country had a long history of military connection with the leader in power. So people always weigh. I mean, that's why Besigye has always been weighed also. Party has been in the army, was the president's doctor, so he's connected. Amama Mbabazi was a prime minister, he's an insider, party secretary general. So they first see, who are you, you know? Ugandans, they always, I mean, with all due respect, that's why a lot of people who could potentially be good presidents don't even try.
Angelo, if you look at the polls and the way the media has covered the different candidates, we've clearly selected the three front runners and run with us. Yes, print media especially has made an effort to provide space to other candidates, but none of the other candidates is actually making page one news. If you look at the New Vision, the candidate who makes page one news,
up to page 5,
up to almost page 5, is candidate Yoweri Museveni. The opinion poll by the same newspaper indicates he's the candidate who has a clear
I think that should be expected.
Yes. Now, the other candidate, Kizza Besigye, is making it into the news. The ACME report says candidate Yoweri Museveni took the bulk of the news coverage, followed by candidate Amama Mbabazi and candidate Kizza Besigye. 3 of them. Yes, you make an effort. You have Benon Veraro coming in with a quarter page of a story or half a page of a story on page 7. Abed Wanika will take a column strip. Then Maureen Chalia, Mavirizi, and the
appear
others,
in the opinion pages.
They will appear somewhere, somehow. But is there a possibility that these candidates would actually influence the election by slicing out a portion of the electorate? If we look at 2011...
I don't think so.
Why not? Because 2011, Norbert Mao sliced out a portion of the election, of the constituency. I mean, his home area.
Well, that had to do with if Mao was an MP, maybe. I mean, that would be an issue, not at the national level. No candidate has had a significant impact on what the 2 frontrunners take home as their voter share. And, you know, I mean, to make the argument that Ona and Jabwede have made differently, yes, I think that the Ugandan political system has not grown beyond what he calls a referendum on candidate Museveni for historical reasons. When you look at this election, like the last election, and you ask for what is the election about, I think the election has really been always about whether or not Museveni will stay or will go. And this is partly the problem of his opponents, not really part of his problem, because his opponents have made it their message that essentially what every election, the last 3 elections you and I have covered, are about removing
Yoweri Museveni.
Yeah.
So
So
the
voters know.
The voters actually dictate that.
No, but I'm
The
saying,
voters silently, voters ask the question, can you manage
yeah, but you
to
see,
remove him?
but see, if you are a political party and people are celebrating Benon Biraro and Abed Bwanuka, who I voted for once, you know, if you're someone who you have a political machine whose interest is, you know, trying to introduce some other issue to define the election, then you would say perhaps, you know, that the country might start paying attention to, say, what we call issue-based politics. But unfortunately, even as the candidates go around, the underlying current is, and he's talked about the tension, largely about will Museveni stay or go. But Ona's point is much more serious about voters are clever in the sense, they're not even clever in the sense that they sense what power is. You and I can talk about, and the candidates can pontificate about government services. their promises, the promissory notes about, you know, turning the country around, improving employment and things like that. But I think voters understand that an election is about power. And they look at our history, and that reforms the heartbeat. In fact, one of the things I was disappointed in the debate was, okay, I didn't watch the entire debate, but I thought that the two key questions, you know, if you're a serious debate, that you would have focused on. One was, if any of the sides wins, how will they treat their opponents? Yeah. For example, if
maybe that will be asked in the next round of the debate.
It's supposed to be about foreign policy, but if Dr. Besigye won, you know, what would he do with President Yoweri Museveni, who doesn't have presidential immunity anymore? Or if Amama Mbabazi or them jointly won, or even the other way around, if President Yoweri Museveni were to win the election, as the polls tend to suggest, how will he treat his opponents? You know, that's an important question for a country that, you remember that the primary contest within our political system has always been between soldiers and civilians. In the 60s, same thing. Complications came when the army came into power. And so far, even in this election, we have got a front bench largely made up of people who have a history in the military. Yes. So the idea
from number 1 to 4.
The idea of any sensible talk about a political transition, not just an election, would be to say what will be, for example, the future role of the army, and how will victors treat their opponents. Those are important questions, and I think those are the questions that the voters silently prosecute.
Well, I think something interesting happened actually today. After that debate, voters in Mityana municipality also decided to organize their own version of the debate. So they got all their candidates for the municipality MP race and put them in a hall and asked them some tough questions. I listened to some of the answers, and I was quite amazing that people could organize that in a kind of town hall outside the glitz and glamour of the Serena Hotel, and they also had their own version. Meaning that
now, to be fair to polling, I just want to make one point. One of the challenges in the global system has been all these revolutions that come and go. And if you're close to political science and it's supposed to be a science, one of the things that spectacularly failed to do is to predict how revolutions happen. How is it that people who claim they love their leader turn out the next day with pitchforks and try to, you know,
chase him away once he's lost the election?
The reason for this, at least some of the studies suggest, is something called preference falsification. That people disguise their actual preferences because they go with what appears to be the mood, what is being in the debate, what they feel is safer when they say it in public. Now, this kind of social desirability may lead to false answers. And like Ona says, at the core of it,
that's the question of the polls. I think it's Jabuel who raised it and said, do people tell you honestly what they believe? But
I'm saying that it goes deeper than that, because voters will understand when you're telling lies, which is just like you stand up and you make a campaign speech, and what you are about. And I think that in our case, they understand, like Ona says, where power lies, and power lies with armed people. And until Ugandans have an honest discussion about how these armed people and unarmed civilians who run the government can coexist peacefully, if that is the debate, I think that you might find that in an election where this is no longer an issue, people might start paying attention to the issues. Okay,
we need to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll go back to the poll and look at individual candidates, and especially the candidature of Amama Mbabazi and Kizza Besigye, because Amama Mbabazi, the polls seem to suggest, is stagnating. The juggernaut that he was supposed to be doesn't seem to be, though his camp believes his method of operation will actually deliver him to the presidency on February 18th. We'll explore that and also take feedback from our viewers after a short break. Welcome back to this last segment. The number for you to call will be running on your screen in a moment. And please, when you call in, keep your question or comment short. Tell us your name and where you're calling from, so that you allow as many people as possible to contribute, but also for us to know who actually is calling. Gentlemen, let's come back to the question of Amama Mbabazi. What happened? Is it his camp? I have spoken to some people in his camp. They believe actually his magic is working in a quiet way, and they're telling you wait for the surprise on 18th February. The polls don't seem to suggest so. And
even the reality on the ground.
The biggest challenge for them is that he chose the slogan, go forward. And when you are going forward, it has to be so visible. So you really must demonstrate. Look, I think from Amama Mbabazi's own words, he says he's still in NRM, but the wrong part of NRM abandoned him. I think the challenge for him is that he has failed to demonstrate that he has a significant part of NRM openly with him. That's what everyone has waited, and maybe it's not too late for him to say that the good part of the NRM, which I believe in, here the other people who are with me, whom some of them you knew, and I think he has kept on saying that you will see these people. So maybe when they come out,
The other day,
I think people will then believe that he's really going for it. But I think that betrayal, perhaps I may say so, of him by people who assured him. I know Ugandans, they could have actually assured him that we are with you because they want to hedge their bets. And they watched and they decided to say, look, better bird in the hand. So I think he was betrayed by people who are cheering him on. Because
are you also writing him off?
No, I'm not writing him off, but I'm saying first of all, he must create a perception that you are going to win. You know, you may win by surprise, but it's nice to also have a perception. It's nice to create a momentum. So I think if he has people within NRM who say they are with him, he needs to actually tell them to come out. Eh?
The last time
they
we
must
had
come out
from
say
the
either you are
camp.
with me or you are not with me, because that will help
just a moment, if you can
him
hold it.
define him as a representative of the good NRM, which he claims he is.
Okay, gentlemen, if you could pick some callers online. Hello? Hello? Yes. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, your name and where you're calling from. Kindly keep your question or comment brief.
Yes, my name is Wolumeli Simon. I'm calling from Kampala.
You're calling from Kampala?
Yes.
Yes.
And I do think that opinion polls count.
Yes. Are these opinion polls released recently reflective of what your colleagues, your neighbors and other people think actually?
Exactly. Exactly. Because one, they may not reflect the rural community's perception for a simple reason that probably they do not read into this. The spread or the reach of the newspapers does not reach them, and what in the rural area would constitute an opinion poll is not a clear concept. But it is also important for the parties to the details of the opinion polls, and I think this is very important for them to strategize. For instance, you will recall that numbers doubled, and this is what Onapito is not telling the people. So,
hey, what I'm telling them, what I'm saying is surging. Why are you not listening?
No, Onapito is basically saying, Seven is in front. But
Yes.
the trend is that
Did you just tell us that the opinion polls reflect what your neighbors and colleagues are saying?
exactly it does.
Yes. And what it's saying is that Museveni is either at 71% comfortably or at 51%.
No, but you know that in the previous poll by the New Vision, he was at 71%. In the current one, he's at 71%. And yet, the current also, the New Vision says the other candidates have improved. So if they improve, Museveni cannot be constant.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think that's an interesting argument he's raising. Do we have another call online? Hello? Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir. Your name and where you're calling from. Keep your question or comment brief.
This is Ahmed calling from Barara.
Yes.
I want to make one point.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, opinion polls, but we need to consider the questions that we have asked. In this situation, there is one interesting question, because the interviewers wanted to know who were the organizers. People were asked who were the organizers. It is stated that most people thought the organizers was the government, and this to me had much to do with the answers.
Yes, the question I put before we opened the lines was, do the opinion polls reflect what you're experiencing where you are in Mbarara?
Here in Mbarara, it doesn't reflect.
What is it like in Mbarara?
In Mbarara, actually, basically is winning. I'm telling you. Mbarara municipality basically is winning.
Okay, thank you for your opinion. Let's have another call on.
We qualified it.
Yes, let's have another call on line. Hello. Hello. We have another call on line. Hello.
Yes, hello.
Yes, your name and where you're calling from. Keep your question or comment brief.
A very good evening, Charles and the rest of the team tonight.
Good evening to you.
I'm called Nyombi Richard BMRO.
Yes, Richard.
Now, for me, actually, opinion polls do count in an election, but it depends on who conducts them and how the ground is level.
Richard, could you respond to the question I put?
Uh-huh.
Do these opinion polls that were released over the last week reflect what you're experiencing where you are?
Not at all. If we go by the new way, not at all, because first of all, New Vision is an NRM.
No. Don't go into that, please. Just tell us, now, what is the situation where you are?
The situation where I am and the situation where I've been, the situation is contrary to what the New Vision released.
What is that situation?
The situation indicates that people really need change. People are tired of the regime. They want to push on. They want to get any person who can lead Uganda to another level, but not this incumbent one. Just one thing to mention here, Charles.
Yes.
Yesterday, I laughed my lungs out when Mr. Opondo collided with Mr. Wakida, where the former said the latter had requested 50 million shillings to publish an opinion poll. For someone who has worked with the NRM, I'm certain there was only misunderstanding between Opondo and Mr. Wakida on what percentage to give Museveni, and they failed to agree, thus creating that battle. So, honestly, in Uganda now, opinion polls are crucial, whereby if you have money and you have the state resources, you can get whatever percentage you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have let's just take one more call and then we'll come back into studio.
Hello?
Yes, your name and where you're calling from. Keep your question or comment brief.
I'm David Apiano Fona. I'm calling from Tororo.
Yes, please.
Personally, I believe that opinion polls really matter. Provided you look at the sampled areas, the number of respondents, and all the margin of error. Scientifically, that's what you critically look at.
Are the opinion polls that were published representative of what you hear in Tororo?
Exactly. It's representative. Personally, I felt that 71% for NRM was on the lower side. I believe that it should have been even a number more high than that.
What is the number you'd give?
I'll only give NRM around 74, 75, given the number of respondents. It depends whether there are 3,000 sampled, how many villages are sampled. NRM as a district, NRM as a political party, given its achievements, its own record.
Okay, we'll not go into the campaign. We'll stop the other callers to go into the campaign bit. Just tell us what is on the ground where you are. We need to bring this discussion back into studio briefly.
Charles,
yes.
Just a moment.
Yes,
on a Peter Komola, it is extremely excited. Charles,
yes.
just a minute.
Please go ahead.
I want to tell you that given the excitement, I'm looking at the rural sector, NRM is doing extremely very well. 71 was not quite properly representative.
What about 51%?
Would have been better.
What about 51%?
51% was on the below the belt. I think Kira had his own issues. And of course, since he has completely come out, I don't want to discredit his research. I have not looked at the number of respondents and probably the areas that he probably could have done his research. He would have he would have concentrated in urban centers, and they expect him to come up with that arrangement.
Okay.
But the rural sector, my brother Charles, you have been, I know you move a lot. My brother Onapita Komoloit knows. NRM could be having issues in probably Teso sub-region, partly Sebei, and maybe some Elgon zone areas.
And
but
Tororo?
look at overall. Let's look at Acholi, let's look at Lango sub-regions, let's look at West Nile, let's look at Bukej, let's look at Soga, let's look at parts of central Uganda. Up 28 districts we have in central plus probably Kampala, which is 5. How many? And then look at Western.
Okay.
Surely 71 was below the belt. I think it should have been 75, around 76 for NRM.
Okay, just one question before you leave. Both opinion polls, the one by the New Vision shows Bestia grew by 10 percentage points, from 9% in the opinion poll they published in July to 19 in the one they recently published. The one by Research World International showed him growing by about 15%, from 17% in July to 32%. That's about 15% growth. Is that true? Is that reflective in Tororo?
I'm not very sure whether it is reflective, because what I must be clear about, that when partly, I'm happy with this team that came up with statistics about who spent how much, which I have actually, Henry, I discredited him when I appeared with him somewhere, because for sure, I want to give you an example. We're just taking a little bit, 1 minute of you. When you look at, let me give you an example of another research that was conducted against how much we could have probably spent as National Resistance Movement. Look at what NRM had spent, over 120-something billion shillings, compared to some little money, 30 million for a delegates conference, and against 200 million shillings. And I was like, how did this come? Because FDC has 1,006 delegates, leave alone the NEC and the SEC, and they are saying they spent 200 million, yet each delegate went with 500,000 transport refund. And I was looking at about 503 million transport refund minus meals, minus accommodation, minus all this. And I was like, how realistic is this? So it depends on who
are the figures correct?
Sometimes.
Are the figures correct according to you?
According to me, I think...
You in the NRM, you've spent 120 billion so far.
No. That is not true.
You had 10,000 delegates in Nambole against 1,000 delegates.
Each one
look at 10,000 delegates.
Okay.
Going with,
I'm sorry, my brother.
Look at this.
No. We got to come back to the studio. Thank you very much.
Well, Charles, you know, first of all, it's interesting. All your callers have a view about why polling is important and the science of it, as long as it agrees with their position. And I thought your question was actually unfair, because if you are conducting a poll, then one's view is simply just one of the perceptions in a sample that would be measured.
Yeah. How would you rate this? How would you score this?
This is like that whole thing about the elephant, you know. What if
Depends on where you're touching.
It depends on where you're touching. And in this case, of course, the danger with... so the problem with polling, like on our side initially, is that the culture of regular polling has to take root for it to start, you know, providing dividends. Right now, the polls are not close enough, not consistent, and they're irregular. Something has to change. Polling must become something that's mainstream, that's expected.
Okay, let me go back to the question I put to you, to the panel here. Candidate Amama Mbabazi, you're a journalist, you're a researcher, you watch especially the political trends. Do you think the polls are being unfair to him?
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying to say, is that, you know, what has come out of your calls is that polling is seen as some part and parcel of the propaganda, instead of being, you know, much more scientific about...
Yes, move it away from the propaganda, because when Wakida was launching his poll, there was Ofono Pondo and Mike Sevalu, and they were generally happy that consistently all the opinion polls showed their candidate in the lead. Now later, you go to analyze, 51% means what? Very close to pushing for a runoff. Then you begin debating the opinion poll, again from a very completely new perspective. Now, the candidate of Amama Mbabazi is one that everybody has been watching as a game changer in this particular election. But he seems to have stagnated. Ofono Pondo agrees, Onapito Komolite agrees. Yes, even Opondo does agree and says
they have held similar positions.
Yes, they have held similar positions.
I was working for the winning candidate, then not for the candidate who
from the
is
same
getting
court.
Yes. Some people are treating this as a stillbirth because the arguments that were being had were even at the hotel where they launched the opinion poll, saying, why did TDF, for example, run away from a candidate who knew he had the support in Kizza Besigye, and the surge is talking about, to a candidate they thought, and actually his campaign is not making that major breakthrough. It's not the juggernaut that everybody expected.
Well,
different methods of work?
No, if you're 40 between 35 and 45, you're generally within my generation. I'm now in my 40s. And when you look 10 years from now, I'll be in my 50s. If you add another 15, which is really a very short period, 3 elections, I'll be approaching, you know, my 60s. And if I were 60 and I were looking back at this particular phase of Uganda's political transition, one of the things I hope I would credit Right Honorable Mbabazi for is being part of the section of the NRM that, of course, that broke away but ran a civil campaign. Assuming that we don't have problems after February, it was important, I think, for the NRM, which has now provided the bulk of the opposition, including Dr. Besigye, that the contest within the NRM, which is totally dominated Uganda's political space, completely submerged the traditional parties at independence, that it is having a competition within itself, that it has a civil campaign that will address that question I raised about the military.
Does it have a significant impact on this election?
Let me just say that it was important for someone like Mbabazi to run and run the sort of level-headed campaign that he has, and remain there, being in the positions that he has held. And I hope that should he lose, which it's from what everyone is saying, looks likely, that what we get out of it is a concession speech and nothing more. The difference between Mbabazi and Dr. Besigye and his campaign of defiance is that Besigye comes from the anti-revolutionary wing of the NRM. Mbabazi is not arguing that the revolution has failed, by the way. That's why when I say he says it still is NRM. Besigye says the revolution has failed and it must be overturned. That is a message that has given a certain level of volatility and violence in the competition within NRM. It's very important that NRM has opponents, even one that decamps and goes into go forward after the election, that remain civil. That is the real benefit of having Honorable Mbabazi in that campaign. Now, if you say that the campaign has failed to deliver him as a candidate of significance, the reasons for that have little to do with Right Honorable Mbabazi. It has to do with the failure of the opposition to capture the imagination when they had the opportunity of fielding a single candidate. Had he been that single candidate, would be having a very different conversation.
If he had been, you'd have another 6 candidates from elsewhere.
It would just have been a two-horse race, because the opposition can only be capable of producing one candidate. As it is now...
what then explains Besigye's surge?
But I'm saying that if the time when the opposition came together to debate on a single candidate, they had agreed on one person, whether it's Besigye or Mbabazi, that very fact would have captured the imagination of I believe, of the Ugandan public. That failed. That was a stillbirth.
Yes, before I bring in Jabweli, let me share my own opinion. I was actually happy with 3 strong candidates running.
You have been. We have had this argument before.
2 strong candidates trying to challenge President Yoweri Museveni, because I believe fundamentally that President Yoweri Museveni is not very effective in fighting at multiple fronts at the same time. That's why all his machinery has been aimed at Amama Mbabazi, and they have allowed...
If it is military, Congo, South Sudan,
if you analyze,
I have never understood Charles' argument.
No, if you analyze President Museveni, even in military struggles, he's fought one battle. When he was fighting ADF, LRA was on rampage, and he did not tackle Karamoja. So he finishes ADF, focuses his guns on the LRA. deals with the LRA, then focuses his guns on Karamoja. That's how he's been able to deal with these issues. He cannot fight at multiple fronts at the same time. And that's why Kizza Besigye has been running away from him. They realized as early as November, the first month of nominations, that Besigye was surging. But they couldn't shift focus immediately to Amama Mbabazi. And they've been struggling with that until now. Let me come to you. The Amama Mbabazi candidature, what happened?
I think it's many factors. The first one...
No, campaign, not candidature. He's still a candidate, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, his campaign.
I think in the last few weeks he's been opening up a bit in terms of the insights. Before even he came out to declare his candidature, the conversation he had with his long-term friend, President Yoweri Museveni, I think they had agreed, cut some deals, and he kept on hoping that his friend would perhaps not run this time. So I think that informed a bit of why and what time he came out. Second, he feels a betrayal. The president on his part has not been forthright to come out to acknowledge the discussion or some agreement to step down, and Amama would carry the flag. So, secondly...
But that wouldn't account for the go-forward team not being running either at the lead of the opinion polls or number 2 in the opinion polls. Certainly they should have been in a different place. If his biggest selling point was that he knew President Museveni well, had systems and structures running through the NRM.
The point I'm making is that he actually started this campaign, came out to announce a position a little late to make any impact in the election. That's the point I'm making. Point number one. The second one is, then what did he do when he came out to announce? Quickly was embraced by DP, and I think UPC and the motley collection of all these, the usual hangers-on, people who don't command a following. So he has all sorts of people at the beginning, the smaller the parties, the guys who are in the TDA. I don't think that many of those people came with the numbers, with the influence that he expected. The DP, in fact, the last time Mao spoke and they asked him whether he would sanction MPs or members of DP who are not following the go-forward line, said, no, we cannot do that. Let them, it's their right to do so. So literally... I thought
that's what the TD agreed.
Yes. Literally, Amama finds himself, and you've heard the messages from the Betty Nambozes, the people in Masaka, the Mpugas, literally telling that, no, it was a mistake to front you a candidate. So then the NRM, I think, closed rank when they saw that this man has now come out. I think the old man with the hat decided to close ranks. That's why. I think that's why the question of
the word you're using is wrong. What the establishment did effectively was to criminalize Mbabazi's candidacy. I mean, it was really, it went with a sledgehammer to kill a fly, so to say. So it was actually risky to support him at some point.
And I think that the FDC did almost exactly the same. If you see the way FDC treated people like Beatrice Anyoa, who nominated him, is that FDC also came out very strong against its members who had decided to go with Amama Mbabazi, and therefore almost kind of closed him out.
And I think just also there was the issue of the unfortunate illness of his dear wife, which I think took a bit of emotional drain on him, and clearly she had been a major figure in his, it was obvious that she was going to be a good organizer for him, and it seems to have perhaps also contributed. But to me the biggest thing was the level of betrayal, if you may say, by people who I think told him that they were going. Remember when I announced this campaign team, then people pulled out.
From what Jabweli just said,
and the state was unleashed was him on him. The level of state interference
both ways, both by his old comrades and the new comrades, which is but. Mbabazi had promised a campaign. He structured his campaign in that it will spring surprises. So we got to wait until after February 18th. We need to remind our viewers that voting is actually on February 18th. It will be a public holiday. And unlike previous elections, polling closes at 4, not the usual 5 o'clock. So people need to be aware of some of these things and continue to keep updating them. Gentlemen, our time is out. We need to get out of here. Thank you very much, Angelo, for making time for the show.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you very much, Onapito Ekomloit, Corporate Affairs Director, Nile Breweries, SAB Miller, for making time for the show. And thank you very much, Peter Okello Jabweli. Thank you very much to you, all our viewers, for joining us tonight, and especially those of you who called us. But each one of you who listened in is important to us. Do join us again next Sunday, when we'll continue a discussion into the details of what is going on the campaign trail, until election day and after election day, to see what will be happening. Have a good night.
Thank you.